What's up, everyone? In this video, we're going to analyze exactly how the Constitution attribute works and exactly how your health scales with Constitution, as well as some tips for how you can utilize this attribute effectively and how you can use it to increase your top end max health. The goal here is to give you a solid foundation of understanding how the attribute works and how it scales your health so that you can utilize it effectively for whatever build you're in. Also in this video, I'm going to show you how to calculate exactly how much health you should have based on whatever your Constitution number is. The idea for this video came when I was digging around in PTR yesterday, really trying to understand weapon scaling. I've been playing a bunch of different builds, and so I'm really trying to understand exactly how attributes scale. And so I will be making a future video on exactly how weapon attributes scale, sort of the science behind it. And so if you're interested in that sort of content, stick around. Professionally, I am a mechanical engineer, and so I just really love to understand the mechanics of things and exactly how things work. And I think if you can understand something deeply, you can really utilize it effectively to be better at whatever it is you're doing. And so in this case, you want to be better at New World. And so if you understand exactly how stuff like health and attributes scale and how that scales your health and your damage, you will be that much more effective at creating a good build that fits your playstyle exactly and is sort of min-max to be as effective as possible. Alright, so let's get right into it. Every character at level 60 is going to have a base amount of 6,000 health. And so that includes the 5 base points of Constitution you have. And so that's sort of your starting point at level 60. For whatever reason, this shows I have 6,000 health in my inventory, but it shows I have 1 less hit point on my attribute screen. So 5,999. Not sure why that is, but it's PTR, so let's just assume that it's correct. So the first fundamental concept to understand is that it seems that all attributes scale by hundreds. And so what I mean by that is every 100 attribute points you get to, you're going to have a different level of scaling within that block. And so from 0 to 100 Constitution, your health is going to scale a certain way. When you go from 100 to 200 Constitution, it's going to scale a little differently, usually slightly less. Same thing with 200 to 300 and so on. And I believe the same to be true with weapon scaling, but we'll get more into that in the other video. So for Constitution, in this first block of going from 0 to 100 Constitution, every Constitution point you put in is going to be exactly 25 hit points. And so starting at 5,999, when I add 1 Constitution, it's going to jump up by 25. And so now I have 6,024. And then I add another 25, and then I'll be at 6,049, and so on, all the way up till we are at 100 Constitution. And so since we start at 5 Constitution already, and that is taken into account when we're sitting at our base 6,000 health points, there is a possible of 95 Constitution points you can insert in this scaling window. And so the total amount of health that you are going to get from going from 5 to 100 Constitution is going to be 25 times 95, which is going to give you 2,375. And if we add that to our base 6,000, that's going to give us 8,375. And so if we take 1 off of that to account for the weird fact that we started at 5,999 instead of 6,000, as you can see right here, it's showing that when we put these points in, we should be at 8,374. But as you can see, as soon as I insert those points, my health is actually going to jump up a little higher than that. And the reason that is because of this 100-point Constitution attribute perk. And what that's going to do is give you 10% of your physical armor as HP. So as you can see, my physical armor on this character right now is 1,781.9. And 10% of that, you just move the decimal to the left 1. So you're going to have 178.19. Let's just call it 0.2. By the way, if you ever want to get the percentage of anything, you can use that little trick to get 10%. You just move the decimal over by 1. If you want 5%, just cut that number in half. If you want 20%, double it. If you want 1%, you go 2 decimals over. So just a really easy way to figure out percentages and quite useful. I end up using it quite a bit. Okay, so that's the first scaling block. And just to confirm all this, we're going to run the calculation. So 6,000 base health plus 25 times 95, because that's the available number of attributes you can get going from 5 to 100, and each one of those is worth 25. And so that number is the 2,375 that we discussed earlier. And so that plus your base 6,000 is 8,375 minus the 1 for it being weird, 8,374. And then we can add the 10% of our armor, which is going to be exactly 178.19. And when we add that to the first number, that's going to give us 8,552.19. So rounding down is 8,552. So when we slot these points in, that's exactly where we should be. And there we go. Okay, so now the next scaling block going from 100 Constitution to 200 Constitution works pretty much the same, except instead of 95 available points, there's going to be 100 because you're not starting from 5. As well as each point of Constitution is now worth exactly 24 hit points. And so from scaling window 1 to scaling window 2, the amount of HP you get per Constitution is going to drop down by exactly 1. And this is true all the way up to 200 Constitution, which is where we hit scaling window 3. And so to calculate the exact amount of health we can get out of this scaling window 2, we would go 24 hit points multiplied by 100 possible attribute points, and that's going to give us 2,400. Another useful math trick is if you're ever multiplying by something that's 10 or 100 or 1,000, you literally just add the zeros onto the end. So 24 times 100 is 2,400. And so if you're still paying attention, you might say, well, hold on, how come you get more health from scaling block 2 in total, 2,400, than you do from scaling block 1 in total, which was 2,375? Great question, and that is just because you're starting from 5 in the first scaling window, so you only have 95 attribute points you can put in. In the second scaling window, you're starting from 100 going to 200, so you have 100 possible points. So while each point is worth 1 less, you actually are able to get 5 more total points, and so in the end, you're actually going to get more health out of scaling window 2 than you are out of scaling window 1. That's not taking into consideration the additional bonus you get for armor, and so if you take that into consideration, scaling window 1 is still bigger. The way this information is useful in game is you can basically be confident that the attribute scaling for Constitution from 0 to 200 is very effective. And so now you'll notice that just like in scaling window 1, it says a certain number when we're sitting here before we slot it in the points, but as soon as we actually slot them in, it goes up a little higher than what we were expecting. And the reason that is for scaling window 2 is that at 200 Constitution, you are going to get this attribute perk, which increases your armor by 20%. And so what that's actually going to do is stack with the first Constitution perk, which increases your health by 10% of your physical armor. So when your physical armor goes up by 20%, that is actually going to increase your health by that much as well. And so we can calculate that here. So same physical armor number as before, 1,781.9, and we multiply that by 0.2 to find out 20%, and that's going to give us 356.38. So if we add that to the base armor amount, so 1,781.9 plus 356.38 is going to give us 2,138.28. So let's call it 2,138.3. And if we look, that is confirmed in our inventory. And so our new health percentage from our first attribute perk that we got at 100 Constitution, that gives us 10% of our HP based on our armor, is going to go up. And so that's going to be based off this new number. So instead of taking 10% of 1,781.9, we take 10% of 2,138.3, and that is going to be 213.83. And so now let's just calculate it all together to confirm everything. So 6,000 base health plus 2,375 from scaling window 1 plus 2,400 from scaling window 2 plus 213.83, which is our 10% of health from armor with our armor increased by 20. And that in total is going to give us 10,988.83. Rounded up would be 10,989 minus 1 for our attribute screen being weird in PTR would give us 10,988. And if we look, that is exactly where we are at. Something to note right here real quick is I had to swap a couple pieces of gear to get more constitution on me, so I can keep pushing higher for this example. And so those heavy armor pieces had slightly different physical armor amounts than the heavy pieces that I was wearing with strength. And so when I do this transition here, my armor actually drops from 2138.3 to 2120.9, which accounts for this 2 HP health drop you see right here, where I go from 10,988 to 10,986. And if we calculate it out, we can easily see that there is the 2 HP we are losing from dropping that 18 or so armor. So now moving on to scaling window 3, and this one works almost exactly the same as scaling window 2, except now every point of constitution is going to give you 23 hit points. And so you're probably starting to recognize a pattern by now. Every scaling window we go up in constitution is going to drop the amount of HP we get per constitution point by 1. And so in scaling window 1, we're going to get 25 per constitution point. In scaling window 2, we're going to get 24 hit points per constitution point. In scaling window 3, we're going to get 23. In scaling window 4, we're going to get 22. In scaling window 5, as we keep going up, we're going to get 21, and so on. So to calculate how much health we can get out of scaling window 3, it's going to be 23 HP per constitution point and 100 constitution points. So 23 times 100 is 2,300, and we add that to the 10,986 where we were at, and that's going to give us 13,286. The perk bonuses should not change at this point because there's nothing that's actually affecting your armor value. So the 20% bonus you get on armor and the 10% health increase you get from your armor that's boosted 20% is not going to change anything from here. It's just going to be the flat value that we discussed earlier. And so when we slot these points in, it should be exactly the 13,286 value. And as you can see, there it is. So you can see we have a similar thing happen here where my HP actually jumps up by 12. It took me a bit to figure this one out, but the reason that is because I threw on a Constitution shield to really max out my Constitution and push as high as I could for this example. And when I threw on that shield, the shield actually has 98.8 armor built into itself. And so if I do the calculations for my 2 Constitution attribute perks and I increase that by 20%, that turns it into 118.56. And then I get 10% bonus HP from that number. And so 10% of 118.56, just move the decimal over 1. Now we have 11.856. And so rounding up is 12. And so that accounts for our 13,286 hit points, just jumping up to 13,298 when we put our shield on. Shields and how their attributes work are a whole thing in themselves that I want to discuss, but first I'm going to finish my train of thought on these scaling windows, and then we will get into some other considerations, including shield recommendations. So from here, it's pretty straightforward. No more weird stuff happens with the perks, and it just seems to continue to scale with this pattern. And so once we finish scaling window 3 and hit 300 constitution, we will start into scaling window 4. And so now every attribute point is going to be worth 22 instead of 23. And so the total value we can get going from 300 to 400 is going to be 22 HP per constitution point times 100 constitution points. And that is going to give us 2,200 or 2,200. And so if we add that to where we just were with our shield equipped, so 13,298 plus 2,200 equals 15,498. And boom, that's exactly where we're at. Now, pushing above 400 constitution into scaling window 5, every attribute point is going to be worth 1 less than it was before. And so instead of 22 HP per constitution, we are going to be getting 21 HP per constitution. And so we only have 47 attribute points left to distribute. And so we're just going to do our calculation based off of that instead of the full 100. And so 21 HP per constitution multiplied by 47 constitution points equals 987. And so 987 plus 15,498 is going to give us 16,485. And if we check with where we're at, boom, that is exactly where we're at. And so I think we figured it out. Now we're going to summarize all this so it's nice and clear for everyone at the end. And I'll try to timestamp this so you can navigate around and hopefully get your bearings. Don't have to listen to me math for however long this ends up being. But before that, I want to talk about a couple other considerations that I think are very important. And the first of those is the shield. And so I love sword and shield personally, but I really dislike and disagree with how the shield attributes actually work. And what I mean by that is when you have your shield equipped is the only time you benefit from everything that's on your shield. And so if there's any bonus attribute, any perk, any amount of armor, anything like that, the only time your character will ever be benefiting from that is if their shield is actually out. Even if you have your shield weapon selected, but your sword is sheathed, you will not be benefiting from the shield bonus. You actually have to have it out. And so I agree with this to an extent where I think that the blocking and the armor and all the sort of shield stats should only apply when you have the shield out. But I completely disagree that the base attribute points on the shield don't apply when you just have it sitting on, when you're using the longsword. I don't think you should benefit from shield stats if you're not using the longsword, but if you're using the longsword and you have it sheathed or you have your other weapon equipped, you should absolutely benefit from those base stats because that's how every other weapon in the game works. And so instead of a sword and shield and a spear, let's just say I have a bow and a spear on, and on my spear is 24 dex, on my bow is 24 dex. When I'm using my bow, I'm benefiting from that full 48 dex, the 24 from my bow and the 24 from my spear. In the sword and shield example, if I'm wearing my sword and shield, they split the stats. And so my sword has 12 dex and my shield has 12 dex. That's how they sort of compensate these attributes. If you look at longswords, they have half the base attribute stats of other weapons. And so the problem with this is whenever you're rocking a sword and shield build, whenever you switch to your other weapon, you're only benefiting from half a weapon's attributes from your sword slot. Because as soon as you put your shield away, you don't benefit from the base attributes from your shield. And I think this is an inherent flaw in the game design because the attributes of your other weapon shouldn't be punished because you're rocking a sword and shield. And I think it would be very easy to just make it so that if you're rocking a longsword, you benefit from just the base attribute bonus of your shield, not the armor, not the blocking, none of that stuff, just the attributes. So that way, if you're rocking a sword and shield and a spear, or any other weapon with the sword and shield, it behaves just like you had any other fully scaled weapon in that slot. The other thing that's fucked up about this is if you have Constitution on your shield, when you switch weapons, you're actually going to lose that amount of health, just like flat off the top. And so if you're weapon swapping in combat, which most of us do a lot, your health is going to be going up and down with that weapon swap. And so I really hate that it's like that because there should never be a combat scenario where you're just changing max health over and over again. And so for the way it works right now, I strongly recommend getting a shield with strength. And the reason that is because what we just talked about, your other weapon isn't ever going to benefit from your shield stats the way it is right now. So the only thing that benefits from your shield stats is your longsword. And longsword scales primarily with strength. And so getting strength on your shield is going to give you the maximum possible damage output with your sword, more than dex. Unless you already have like 300 plus strength, then it might make sense to actually get dex on your shield because that 12 initial dex might actually make your sword damage scale higher because it's in scaling window 1 of the dex, 0 to 100. Whereas with strength, you're going to be in the 300 plus scaling window when you add that extra 12 strength. And so I think in that scenario where you're like a full strength build might be the only reason why you could grab dex on a shield right now. And I think for anyone that's in that situation, that would be worth testing just to see whether the 12 extra strength or the 12 extra dex actually gives you higher end longsword damage when you have your shield out. And so like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be investigating weapon scaling similar to how I'm digging into this. And so look for future videos to discuss the specifics of not just longsword damage scaling, but all other weapons and attributes. And then you keep it the way it is if you're not wearing a longsword, where if you have a shield on with no longsword, that shield does absolutely nothing except is heavy. And so that brings us to that point, which is If you're not using Sword and Shield, wearing a shield is completely useless, and the only thing it's doing is weighing you down. You do not benefit at all from any of the stats or attributes on it. The reason this is important is because let's say you're in a medium armor build. If you have a shield on that's not doing anything, but adding, you know, let's say it's even just a light shield, 2.5 pounds, 2.6 pounds or whatever it is, that's probably one more piece that you could upgrade from light to medium or medium to heavy. And so basically if you're wearing a shield and not using it, you're leaving potential armor on the table. I think the only way it makes sense to wear a shield cosmetically is if you're already in heavy armor, because then it doesn't matter how much extra you carry, really. And so feel free, if you're already rocking a heavy armor build, to throw on a shield because it looks dope. But other than that, really reconsider carrying a shield with you if you're not using it. Alright, so we figured out exactly how Constitution scales. We discussed the shield. Now real quick, I want to go into a couple ways that you can maximize your HP beyond just putting points into Constitution. And there's really three areas that I've found where you can do this. And that is getting the health perk, which is only available for the neck or amulet armor slot. And that can go anywhere from 3% to 9.4%. Max HP based on the item level. I think it's 3% at 100 item level and 9.4% at 600 item level. And then you also have the Hail and Hardy territory bonus. And so that is a project that whoever owns your settlement can start. And it's completed by everyone doing the turn-ins on the town board. And once it's activated for 3 days, you have 10% increased max HP. And so I don't know exactly how the territory bonuses work. I've tried to switch mine and it just always goes back to where my house is in First Light, which is fine with me because luckily the owners of First Light on my server pretty much always keep Hail and Hardy up. And so it must be wherever your house is. If anyone knows the details to that, you could drop it in the comments. That would be awesome. But basically, wherever you're getting your territory bonus from, I strongly recommend trying to convince that party, whether it's a company on your faction or another faction, to keep Hail and Hardy up as much as they can, because it not only benefits them, it benefits everyone who has a house in their turf. And so 10% extra HP goes a long way for everyone, and I think that is probably one of the most valuable territory bonuses you can get out of anything that exists, especially if you're PvPing. So Hail and Hardy stacks with the extra health from the amulet. And then the third thing is the bonus from food. As of right now, it seems like the most Constitution you can get from attribute food is 40, and that is from this roasted rabbit with seasoned vegetables. Sounds pretty tasty. And so as far as I can tell, that's going to act exactly like putting 40 extra Constitution points in your attribute screen. You know, just treat it like 40 more skill points that you've inserted into Constitution. And so when you're doing your calculations, you can account for it that way. There's also now this roasted monstrous turkey leg around that I think is from some like rare spawn turkey holiday thing. And for the sake of science, and because I was making this video, I decided to go ahead and spend 1,300 gold on one of these to see what it did. And I was very disappointed because it doesn't say exactly what it gives you. It just says that it gives you 1 HP and 0.25% luck, and then it scales with your level. And so I just wanted to see what that Constitution number ended up being, and it ends up giving you 33 Constitution at level 60, and so it's actually 7 less than the much cheaper 40 Constitution food. And you can actually get 30 plus 30 Constitution food, at least on my server, for way cheaper than even the 40, like, you know, maybe like a sixth of the price. And so I guess the only reason you'd get this turkey leg is for the luck, but I don't know how much that luck scales. And if they're this price on your server, you'd basically have to get, you know, like 1,300 gold worth of lucky for the 40 minutes that it lasts. So I don't know. It doesn't seem worth to me. I feel like that 1,300 gold for me is just rip, but at least it's for science, and hopefully no one else spends that much. So if you're a tank, or if you're really just looking to max out your Constitution, even if you're not built fully into con, I think these three things are really good to kind of push your top end up, especially if you're doing certain activities where you need more health, you know, like a endgame dungeon or war or something like that. just a couple more tools for the tool belt. All right, so finally, we are going to try to make some conclusions from this and see what we can take away to help us actually be better at New World. So if you skipped ahead to this part, welcome. If you've been with me the whole time, I salute your attention span and your scholarship, and you will now probably know more about Constitution than pretty much everyone in New World. So time well spent, in my opinion. I spent way longer. Keep that in mind. Which, by the way, if you find value in this, please consider supporting my channel. It takes an inordinate amount of time to make a video like this, and I would love to make many more on the different aspects of New World, weapon scaling and all that kind of stuff, but I really need to be able to justify my time to sink the amount of resources into making a video like this. And so if you like this kind of stuff, just consider sticking around, and all the stuff that everyone always says, you know, likes, comments, subscribes, and especially like sharing the video, all really does actually help the YouTube algorithm pick it up and suggest it to more people. And so the more of that stuff you guys can do, the more helpful long form New World mathematical videos I can make. All right, so in conclusion, I think the number one takeaway from all this is to know that health scales linearly, not exponentially, and with none of the perks considered, the Constitution attribute is going to be exactly 4% less effective per scaling window you go up. And so from 0 to 100 Constitution, let's call it 100% effective because you're getting 25 HP per hit point, so the maximum possible. And then in scaling window 2, you're getting 24 out of 25, and so that's 96% effective compared to scaling window 1. Scaling window 3, you're getting 23, and so that's 92% effective compared to scaling window 1. And it continues to decrease in effectiveness by 4% every scaling window you go up. And it looks like this pattern should continue into scaling window 5 and potentially 6 and beyond. And then I would say the first 2 scaling windows are extra effective because of the bonus health you get from the stacking Constitution perks. So I think the perk at 100 Constitution is the highest value, which gives you 10% of your total armor as health. And I think the value of that perk greatly increases depending on what kind of armor you're wearing. So if you're wearing heavy armor, that perk is very valuable. If you're wearing medium armor, it's sort of valuable. If you're wearing light armor, it's not that valuable. And I would say the same exact thing about the 200 Constitution perk, because that just gives you a 20% armor increase. And so that just makes your 100 Constitution perk that much more effective. And so we have this linear scaling model of Constitution. And so you can basically use this for any build you're looking at doing to know exactly how effective your attribute points are going to be, depending on how many points you put into Constitution and how high you want to actually try to scale your health. Beyond that, the other stuff we talked about is that Shield only applies attribute stats when it's equipped and unsheathed. And so because of this, the only thing it benefits is your longsword. And so since longsword scales primarily with strength, you should always get strength as an attribute on your shield, except potentially in the 300 plus strength case that we discussed. And then you can get an extra 10% health from Hale and Hardy if you can get that territory bonus for wherever you're posted up at. And then you can get another 3 to 9.4% max health on top of that by finding the health perk on your amulet. And then you can use attribute food to totally max out, the best of that being the roasted rabbit with seasoned vegetables, giving you an extra 40 Constitution points. Boom. So that is it. And the last thing I want to do is leave you with 2 equations that you can use to calculate some of this stuff. So I want to give you the calculation for how you can calculate exactly what your perk bonuses should equate to, and give you the calculation to calculate exactly what your HP should be based on what your Constitution number is. All right, so in these equations I'm about to show, anything in brackets is a value that you would input based on whatever your unique situation is. And so taking a look first at the perk calculations, if you just have perk 1, meaning you have somewhere between 100 and 200 Constitution, so you don't have the second perk yet, the calculation is going to be your armor value times 0.1, and that's going to give you your bonus HP that you get from that perk. And then you are going to be able to add that to the result from the second equation that we're going to go over in a minute, and that will give you your total HP. So if you have 200 or more Constitution, you're going to use this second perk equation, and that's going to account for the 20% increase in armor that you get from that, and then you multiply that value by 0.1, and that's going to give you your bonus HP. So to calculate your total max health, you're going to take these perk values, if you have them, and you're going to add that to this equation. And so in this equation, these letter variables that you see are essentially the amount of constitution you have. And so your first 100 constitution points are going to go into A, and your second 100 constitution points are going to go into B, third into C, and so on. And so if you have a 0 value for any of these, that's going to make that part of the equation go to 0, and you're going to add 0. And so this will let you calculate exactly how much HP you should have based on your con number. And then you're going to add the perk bonus calculation for any of the perks, if you have them, onto this, and that's going to give you your total HP. And then to account for the 3 bonus things we talked about, if you're using any attribute food in your calc, that just counts like adding additional points in the attribute window. So include that bonus number in your total con number with the variables A through G. And then if you have your neck health perk or Hale and Hardy, you're just going to multiply your final health number by those percents, and it should be right about where your HP should be. I found there's a little bit of slack in the numbers, which is a little disconcerting. When I calculated this out with my character, I actually have about 3 HP less than I should, which is not cool. And I think that's because they actually round down every calculation interval, which over the course of the full calculation ends up jipping you a few health. And so I don't like that at all. I think it should be calculated exactly. And if you're a numbers guy like me, you know that every number counts, you know. You could live with 1 HP, and if you had 3 less because of a round down consideration and calculation, you'd be dead instead of alive. And so 1 HP can literally be the difference between life and death. Anyways, that is going to be it for this one. And so thank you for watching, and I really hope you were able to get a lot of value out of this video, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.